in this portion, the portion of Toldot, we are in a general way speaking of a birth, of a rebirth. Toldot, it's also the Hebrew word for the offsprings or the history, and it is also the portion in which we will meet Yaakov, the three forefather, for the first time. And it's also always comes in the beginning of the month. And we know that the beginning of the month, the Hebrew month, is where the moon reappears in the sky. So Toldot comes in the beginning of the Hebrew month of Kislev, which is the month in which we have the Hanukkah festival, as if it's coming to suggest us or to urge us to focus on our ability to form light even in the darkest places. And here in this portion, Yaakov, the third forefather, who is also the figure on which the nation of Israel is called upon, because we know that Yaakov later on in the story will be called Israel. And he's also the representative of the Tiferet attribute. So if you remember, we talked about the fact that Avraham was the Chesed attribute, and then later on that Yitzchak was the Gvura attribute, and now we have Yaakov, which is the Tiferet attribute. This attribute is very special because it's basically, it takes in it all three forces of the Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, V'Yesod. All those are coming to light through the Tiferet attribute, and also so it holds within it like the powers of all those six attributes, but it's also the sixth attribute from the beginning of the tree of life. We have Keter, Chochmah, Binah, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet. So this is the six from the above and also the six from the middle. And that is because Tiferet, it's the heart, it's the attribute that symbolizes the heart, the human heart. So Yaakov is about to be born and to be raised into somewhat a harsh environment, which is also a nice comparison to where our heart is usually most of the time. A reality in which he would need to fight and confront an evil brother, his Esav, his twin, which is also comes to suggest about the combat that we have between good and evil inside our own hearts. Or as we learned, every figure in the biblical story is here to teach us something about ourselves. It's some sort of a force we have within our soul. So we are about to face here two opposite sides inside ourselves, or those are about to be revealed to us in the story. But first, let's start with the beginning of the portion in the verse, and these are the offsprings of Yitzchak, the son of Avraham. Avraham fathered Yitzchak. So a requested question regarding this verse would be, if Yitzchak had already been identified as the son of Avraham, then why does the verse repeat again the fact that Avraham fathered Yitzchak? Why do we have here the duplicate of this? Well, so we know that the Jewish tradition gives a great deal of importance to the forefathers' figures as they create the initial physical format of the Jewish nation, as well as the metaphysical, spiritual core of abundance that raised the monotheistic belief. And also it comes to tell us in a way that the Yaakov doesn't stand for its own. We have before Yaakov Avraham and Yitzchak, and then Yaakov. So meaning that his figure is a direct is influenced by his father Yitzchak, which is influenced by his father Avraham, and all those three need to collaborate together inside ourselves. So Yitzchak, the son of Avraham, that when we speak about the history of Yitzchak with the first verse, it is to say that Yitzchak is counted as the legit heritage of the offspring of Avraham, which, as we know, is the primary figure that connected and bond with Hashem, with God. Also, we learn on Chayei Sarah portion that the divine service of Avraham was centered on the attribute of chesed, as we said, which is the kindness, the love, the sharing, the contributing, while the divine service of Yitzchak, his son, centered on the attribute of gvura, the might, the strength, the holding back. Now, our sage, and also we know that all three fathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, each one of them takes his characteristics out of this attribute. The chesed would be benevolence, kindness, love, like we said. The gvura would be restraint, would be severity, would be the holding back, the might, the strength. And now the third, which is Yaakov, which is the tiferet, would be the truth and the mercy. Abraham's chesed was exemplified by his exceptional love of God, his charity, his campaigning on behalf of the condemned, and his lifelong effort to enlighten the people around him and to actually put God's name on the map of those days that were. Now, Yitzchak, however, the gvura, was expressed in his great awe towards God. He was self-disciplined, he was an introvert, and he was some sort of a silent figure. Now, as we will learn in this portion, Yaakov, the Tiferet, had in him the capacity for harmony and mercy and truth. He has within him the ability to integrate these two diverse traits of his ancestors to a cohesive whole, to act as one. In Yaakov, the polar diverse of chesed and gvura were synergized in an all-embracing, all-enduring character, a character which, with a consistency and sustainability that we have in truth. But what is this truth that Yaakov defines and signifies? So we know that in the biblical story, in the book of Bereshit, we have the history of Noach, Ele Toldot Noach, the history of Noach. And we also have the history of the heavens and the earth, Ele Toldot Hashamayim ve'aretz. And here in this portion we have Ele Toldot Yitzchak, well, which implies or brings to the table, interestingly, not the past or the history of the father Yitzchak, but rather the story of his future legacy, of his children. Until now, in the biblical story, Yitzchak's life belonged to, or were a build-up to Abraham's doing and to Abraham's life event. He was, in a way, only a shadow of his father's path, and therefore was formulated and recognized as the continuance of his family tree, only in comparisons to his father. In the biblical story up until now, Abraham was the center of gravity. He was the actual hero of the story up until now. He was the ultimate believer and the definition of faithful servant to Hashem. Everything surrounded around him, his life, his relationship with other people, his relationships with his wife and with his children, while his young son, Yitzchak, was considered and referred to only through the context of his father's life event and actions. Yitzchak was, as we said in the previous portion of Chayei Sarah, a figure that signifies the awe and the fear of the divine, terrified by the divine experience that shaped his behavior and character and personality. He was the ultimate God-fearing man, and hence the representer of the Gvura attribute. Rivka, his wife, on the other hand, who did not suffer the events of the nomadic experience of the Akedah, is his chesed companion, the one that completes him and therefore is more direct in its relationship towards Hashem. She is not afraid from the divine. She is not terrified from any encounter with God. She is not congested by the memory of the horror experience of the Akedah, and come forth as a more a subtle character, but such that can actually observe her husband's fearful nature and approach towards life. The strong and fearless Rivka, the strong and fearless woman, is demanding to know the divine ways. She is also demanding to know why does her children fighting inside her belly. And also, as we will see in the story, she will be the one to, in a way, demand that the blessings of Yitzchak will go to no other than her young son, Yaakov, the younger of the twins. With these two very different twins in her stomach, in her belly, Rivka represents the part in us that has a conscious acknowledgement of opposing forces inside ourselves. Her conscious recognition of the multitude of faces expressed in the proclamation of two Gentiles in your belly is providing us with an extremely important internal understanding of our mortal characteristics. As Rivka is a force within us, just like any other figure in the biblical story, we are now can acknowledge the differences we face within ourselves in regards to our inner soul opposite components. The one is called Yaakov and the other one will be called Esav. Aware and conscious of the contrasts within our personality represented by those two twin brothers, which are multi-faced beings, while one is shadowing the other one. So now we are more ready to understand or to start a somewhat more complex inner journey of our soul, of ourselves and of our conscience, and especially of our heart, because Yaakov is the Tiferet, which is representing the heart. The initial hostility will be something that we would have to face, because whenever we want to understand something in regards to contrasts, usually it will start with hostility between those. And the initial hostility between Esav and Yaakov inside their mother womb is archetypal and also forms a basis of a future sibling relationship that's set before they even born. And again, try to remember and to consider the fact that those two twins are forces within us, fighting to get, each one of them is fighting to get his recognition, each of them is trying to win and control the other one. We can find an earlier hostility motive already in the first portion of this book in Bereshit with the story of Cain and Hevel. Then, or there, the hostility lies close to the surface until it emerges and bursts with the first provocation that matches the wild and undomesticated nature of humans, the murder and the violence there in the story. And then another hostility that we will face later motive of the Ishmael and Yitzchak, the two brothers. And now we have Esav and Yaakov. And they also have hostility between themselves, because whenever we have two forces, we will receive this inflammation of one is trying to overcome the other. So now also remember the order of evolution, the fact that the spiritual realms are manifesting themselves through reality, but in a layered way. We have here three sets of two brothers. Each comes in a more subtle form to the existing reality as the story progresses, but yet also in the deeper level, if those started as an outside forces, now they are reappearing as a more internal condition in our self-recognition. As we said, the hostility that may have started with Cain and Hevel, we have also here in the brother of Yaakov and Esav, and we had it also in Ishmael and Yitzchak. And to be honest, in general, in many respects, the Torah account of Yitzchak's family kind of reads like a replay of Abraham's story. Many years without children, followed by the birth of two sons. The elder one is wicked, the younger one is righteous. Yitzchak favors the elder son. Esav, much as Abraham, is much more sympathetic towards his elder son, Ishmael. While Rivka, like Sarah, preserves in her efforts to ensure that the younger righteous son is recognized as the true heir and the sole progenitor of the great nation which God promised to establish from their seed. There is, however, a significant difference between the two sets of brother, Ishmael ve'Yitzchak, Esav ve'Yaakov. Ishmael and Yitzhak were born of two different mothers. Ishmael was the son of Hagar, a former Egyptian princess still attached to her pagan ways, while Yitzhak was the son of the righteous Sarah. Furthermore, Ishmael was born when Avraham was still Avram without the hay, and he was still uncircumcised, and can be said to belong to his father's imperfect past, if you want to say, while Yitzhak was conceived after Avraham had attained the perfection signified by his name change and by circumcision. Also, Esav and Yaakov were twins born of the same righteous mother, and they raised in the same holy environment. Their father, Yitzchak, who was circumcised on the 8th day of his life and who never set foot outside of the Holy Land, unlike his father, had no idolatrous past and no pre-Yitzchak periods in his life. So where did Esav's evil genes come from? And what do those brothers in both very different formats of the story try to tell us? And also even more puzzling is the fact that Esav's wickedness seems predestined from the womb. If Esav had turned bad later in life, we might point this in the fact that every man is giving the absolute freedom to choose between good and bad, between to be righteous or to be wicked. But how are we to explain Esav's gravitation towards evil before he was even born? The Lubavitcher Rabbi explains it in a beautiful way. He says that the fact that Esav was naturally inclined towards idolatry was not in and of itself a negative thing necessarily. It meant that his ordained mission in life was the conquest of evil rather than the cultivation of good. And now it is written in the scriptures that Yitzhak favored Esav because he was a hunter, because this ability to hunt, this is something that it will appeal to Yitzhak because he is the gvura, he is the might, he is the strength. So the natural thing for him is to prefer this brother. While Rivka loves Yaakov, here is the love of a mother without any explanation or justification, just an unconditional love towards her son. An interesting thing here is to overall look at that the fathers provided with the extended or the general driven synchronization force towards the divine evolution in its more natural way for the continuity of their seed, while the mothers, they engaged in directing this promised heritage towards its initial goal, to establish a sacred or sanctified heritage of ultimate believers, of devoted people that would continue a legacy of substantial godly faith. Both mothers identified something very special in their young children from very young age, and they acted upon it with a covered, refined, and yet very much essential authoritative will that was influenced and was observed with their Holy Spirit. The mothers were the ones responsible for the establishment of their heritage. They took responsibility into their hand, whether it's Sarah after Sarah wanted Hagar and Ishmael to leave their household, or now Rivka that is directing Yaakov to receive the blessings from his father instead of his brother Esav. So we see here that they established their heritage, while the fathers, in a very general assumption, preferred the as we saw, the elder son, the wicked son. So the mothers gave the tone for the right direction, as if they were more aligned and aware of the undercurrent sublime godly will for the continuance of the divine heritage promised to their husbands, and act upon it in several occasions. Now let's go to talk about Yaakov's character. As a twin, Yaakov was in a constant need of develop his personality and character while dealing with himself. his parents, but also with his evil twin Esav. Described as an innocent man that is seated in tents, humble and wise, an introvert that is preserving his parents' legacy. Yaakov is compared to Esav, his brother, which is wicked and evil and a hunter and the man of the field, an extrovert. But if we look closer and deeper into the case of Yaakov's character, we will notice that he was not so innocent at all, or at least not in the conventional way of the word. From the biblical story, Yaakov is portrayed as a man of great trickery. Naturally, he being the son of his mother, he received or inherited some of her family's unpolished behaviors and capabilities, such as conning, deceiving, and fraud. In Yaakov's behavior, we recognize lots of the inner manifestations of the snake even. He is to twist, to interweave, and to plot his misfortunate circumstances of reality to gain the blessings of his father, and also later on to gain the wives from his evil uncle Lavan. Yaakov is getting his way each and every time using somewhat questionable ways to achieve it. And in accordance, also his life stories or his personality will develop and expand with virtues and shortcomings, with light and shadow. And so we must learn from Yaakov, out of this trickery character, the truth about truth. The truth is that it forms within it many paths of trickery, illusions, and numerous ways of deceit, which unfortunately, as we will see in the story, and as we can see even in reality itself sometimes, is necessary in order to implement the desired outcome, even the divine desired outcome. So the truth is that we have within us the same dichotomy that Yaakov had, the same inner light and shadow, both equally important to our progress, and especially when engaging in spiritual awareness. Because as humans, when we wise enough to recognize within ourselves the shadows or the manipulations of the shadows or the tricks inside us, we would and could then be able to overcome them. This crazy, almost unbelievable truth about ourselves, about our inner soul, about our heart, we learn from Yaakov's character. Rivka's pregnancy and the story of the two brothers symbolizes our inner dichotomy. It symbolizes the opposing forces inside us, each fighting for its existence, and our need to prioritize one above the other. Yaakov is a courageous coward. He's innocent and yet very manipulative, very sophisticated. He's honest, but not so much. He is vulnerable, but also can be very rude. Through Yaakov, we are confronted with our pragmatic nature. In the face of spiritual indignation, in the portions to come, we will see that this specific character, this particular characteristics that Yaakov had, helped him in order to survive. As we will see, Yaakov is the one that is able to fight with the heavenly realms and fight with the angel and win it. So the story of Yaakov is welcoming us to identify those opposite forces within ourselves. It teaches us we must learn to serve Hashem with both domains. We are to conquest the evil and to cultivate the good, as both are pragmatically beneficial to us and extremely important to our survival. This story teaches us about the third part that we were missing after the chesed of Avraham, after the gvura of Yitzchak, and now we have the truth of Yaakov. We need to activate all those three forces together. These are incompatible emotion. Love means to draw near or to draw towards, while fear of Yitzchak means to be distant and separated. And the truth, as we see right now, is extremely a complicated thing with Yaakov's story. However, while worshipping Hashem, while worshipping God, we are to transcend beyond the natural movement of our emotions, our feeling, our behaviors, or our acknowledgements. And so this week, try to investigate Yaakov and Esav inside you. How do they make you feel? Whom do you drone to? What would be the right way to approach each one of them? How can you cultivate in a pragmatic way this fusion of forces within yourself, you can and must fuse this physically and spiritually this week, because this is the story and this is how it goes. So have a Shabbat Shalom.